Recognition, power, and influence is your birthright, and this podcast shows you how to get there. Welcome to episode number 227. Today's episode is an interview that I was able to do last month with the one and only Emily Chang. Emily has been an executive leader at many different industries, organizations, and she has taught us what it means to transcend your subject matter expertise and really create a legacy of your own as an executive leader. She is also the author of an incredible book of stories called The Spare Room. I'm going to let her explain what her own definition of a spare room is, and you're going to be so inspired. I was practically in tears at this part of the interview. And then she also speaks to us about the role that mentorship has played throughout her entire career. There is so much wisdom in today's episode. I think you're going to love every single minute of it. So let's get started. Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out, because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, as always, to be here with you again this week. This week's episode, I have somebody that I really enjoy listening to and hearing from. She feels like my BFF, but I literally know nothing about her except for what I see on social media, on LinkedIn, and the posts that she puts out there, and I get very inspired just from reading her words. And these aren't always executive leadership posts. These are posts about her family and travels that she's doing. I feel like I know her daughter, and it's really amazing to feel and build trust with somebody that you don't even know. And Emily has done it in just a really spectacular way. Also, from what I can tell, she has been an extraordinary leader and had an extraordinary leadership career. So I have been wanting to have her on my podcast, and now is the perfect opportunity. So I'm so grateful to have you on here, Emily. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Stacy.
I'm going to give a formal introduction of you, and then we'll just dive right in.
Sounds good.
Emily Chang is the CEO for VML West and is global commercial leader with 24 years of experience spanning QSR, retail, hospitality, creative tech, and FMCG industries. She has held executive roles at McCann World Group, Starbucks, IHG, Apple, and P&G. Emily believes passionately in living with intention and leading with authenticity. A servant leader who has delivered 4 TEDx talks and published a best-selling book called The Spare Room. First of all, I'd love to hear about your personal secrets to success.
Oh, I love that. That's a good open-ended question. And for anybody listening, we had no questions in advance. So I was so looking forward to just having a wonderful conversation. Somebody said to me that podcasts are like therapy because you get asked these questions and you don't have a chance to kind of think through before you respond. And that for me is really fun. So my secrets to success. One is not to force a paradigm when there is no paradigm. I now lead an agency, and oftentimes I get asked the question, what made you shift from client side to agency side? And I've been trying to find the most gracious way to answer that question because I think that's a forced paradigm to think about careers as client or agency, whereas maybe it's broader than that. It's about the job, who you work for, the work to be done, the challenges that you get to overcome, and your growth ambitions. I think those supersede client or agency, or even sometimes one industry or the other. While there are nuances with every type of company, every vertical, I think when you force a paradigm, you might limit yourself. So you've seen I've worked in different industries. I've changed companies a couple of times. And one of the reasons I think I can do that is I don't think about the vertical or to think I'm changing industries. Those types of framework statements can be intimidating. And you can get caught up in, oh my God, what am I doing? Do I have a right to do that? What don't I know? Instead of thinking, okay, here's the job to be done. Here's why they're interested in bringing me in. Do I have that value to contribute? What else do I have to learn? And leave everything else open-minded. That's the first thought that comes to mind.
Oh my God, it's perfect. And I tell my clients, the best thing that can ever happen to you is to get a job that you know nothing about. Like get a role as a vice president or a senior vice president where you're forced to rely on your team and rely on your own executive leadership expertise. So I love that. So when you're thinking about shifting paradigms and so on, is that true? Like my theory is that we can rely on this transferable skill of executive leadership. And if we know how to lead a team, if we know how to find answers, if we know how to get the answers that we need to know for our group, has that been your experience as you've been shifting paradigms?
Yeah, I think you have to know yourself pretty well. You have to know what you bring to the table and identify what elements are transferable and which maybe had worked in a different context that may or may not now. I think you also need to be reflective enough to know what you don't know and what you're not good at. And then when you assess the landscape of what you're entering, consider, how do I supplement? Do I need to strengthen what is not a strength today? Or is there an existent strength that I can leverage within the organization, whether it's people or process? I think that sort of assessment can be really helpful. Sometimes I use the framework the first 90 days. Sometimes I just kind of think through, call it like a list of hypotheses. Okay, I think I'm coming into this role and I can bring A, B, and C. I think these are the questions. I think these are the places where I can add value or where things could be optimized. And then come back every weekend in the beginning, and then come back every month. I've now been in this role over a year, and I'm still coming back to that list of hypotheses. And some were wrong. They're absolutely high functioning, and there's not much I can do to improve. There are new ones that I'll add to the list. And then there are some assumptions that just need to be tweaked. But I think that kind of regular visiting of a list of initial hypotheses keeps fresh. You know, we often use the phrase, he's already drunk the Kool-Aid. It helps you not drink the Kool-Aid. It helps you keep fresh why you joined this company. And it also serves as sort of a lighthouse for you of what is it I want to achieve in this role? Why did they bring me here? And what do I want them to say about me after I leave one day?
I really love how you're explaining to us your thought process and the different ways that you think about it, like the framework of 90 days, the framework of shifting paradigms. I believe that you can start to create these frameworks and it gives your team something that they can follow. And when you have a leadership framework in that way where you're sort of spelling it out, this is how I see things and this is how I see your role. But in that sort of more thought leadership way, is that something that you did back when you were an executive leader at these various companies, or is that something that you've just sort of grown into more recently?
I think it's something I've consistently done, but as I get older and with each change, I think I approach with more humility. You get to a point where you're like, I'm never going to know it all and I'm never going to be the best. And there are times I look back also with a lot of humility and think that was one of my worst times. Gosh, I hope nobody judges me or my capabilities based on how I showed up that day or that month. I think that kind of approach changes our mindset toward our environment and toward the people that we're meeting every day. Because it's so easy to draw a conclusion and say, I want to work with that person. I don't want to work with that person. That person's good. That person's not good. Those are such blanket statements. And maybe they are great, but in the wrong job. Maybe they are great, but somebody just passed away in their family. Maybe they're actually not great, but they tell a great story. On the other hand, I've learned to withhold my assessment of myself and my ability to contribute and learn, as well as the people around me. So I think that's probably something that's changed over time. But for me, I came across that book, First 90 Days, really early on. And I had the privilege of starting my career at Procter & Gamble, which is all about serving up more best practice than you can ever use. But you get, as a result, this cornucopia of options from which to choose and kind of test out and figure out what works for you.
It sounds like there's this level of curiosity even in yourself and then what you bring to the role. And I think that for a lot of women, and we can sort of talk about any of the challenges that you face throughout your career as being a woman and leadership, but because they're constantly feeling like they have to prove themselves or state their ground or like, I deserve this role, so I need to show them, right? And I think what that does is it cuts off curiosity. And so this willingness to look inside and to really question, like, well, what aspects of what are they sharing with me, like why I can't switch industries or whatever that might be, this challenge that you're trying to overcome, or even have the next level title and somebody says you're not ready yet. What is true about that? And then also have that level of humility and then the willingness to sort of say, okay, here is why I think I can overcome that anyway. I think that's super important. So maybe perhaps let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, did you always come out so well articulated? And so like, I think you've already spoke to this. No, it was an evolution. But what were some of the challenges along the way that you faced as a leader?
I was just talking to somebody about this. They mentioned that I'm a scientist, and I thought that was a funny description. I did study science. I went undergrad when there wasn't a biomedical engineering degree, but that's what I wanted. So I had a major in biology and a minor in chemical engineering. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. They still see me as a scientist. That was probably one of the first major mental shifts I had to make when I joined the business world. Because when you're growing up in science, the way that you articulate your thinking is data point A, data point B, data point C, therefore conclusion. And I realized that people didn't think I was a strong thinker in the beginning because they're like, God, she's just circling. I wasn't. I was using the scientific method. So I learned to flip it quickly. Okay, start with a conclusion. Do they even want the rationale? If they do, be prepared to serve it up. But if not, let it fall to the side. And now you're seen as a sharp thinker and cogent and clear.
Yeah.
It's reading your environment, knowing how they think, understanding the vocabulary. By the way, you can't do these two things unless you learn to listen first. And then adapting what you think, staying true to yourself, but using a language that is already easy to understand.
I like that. And I really like the connection to science because a lot of my clients do come from biotech or healthcare industries. And I think that in healthcare in particular for women, there is a huge flip where we see a lot of women up until the director level. And it's an industry that you go in because you really want to change things and you want to change the system and you want to bring drugs to patients or whatever. And then you find yourself at an even stronger, I feel like, glass ceiling, because almost stronger in the sense that it's more of a surprise because it flips. Whereas in STEM careers like tech, it's like, well, no, I've always been the only, this whole career path. But in healthcare, I find that that's not the case necessarily. And so then they sort of get to the ceiling. And so it's interesting that your background kind of starts out that way. And then you had to figure out how to switch some of that language.
I think we often talk about this idea of fixed and growth mindset. It's so much more than words. Humble confidence, I think, is probably the one phrase that encapsulates it. Why? Because it's sometimes seen as an oxymoron, but it's not. I think my confidence comes from a source of humility. Where else does confidence come from? Perhaps a very strong sense of self, perhaps an inflated sense of self. Maybe it comes from other people telling me I'm great, and therefore my confidence fluctuates based on what other people think of me. I think when your confidence comes from a humility, what that means is you know what you're good at, but you know there are a lot of people who are better than you. You know what you're not great at, and you're keen to learn and get better. That's the source of a confidence that allows you to enter a room with that posture, not because you have an inflated sense of self or you think you're the best or you're supremely confident in your ability to answer any question. Rather, you just know who you are. I think that's the key, because if you come into your role, your job, your career, your life with humble confidence, what you're doing is you're managing your energy. You're focusing on what's possible. You're embracing possibilities, and that is a growth mindset. Whereas if your confidence or your sense of self is defined by your current role, your title, your pay, or others' perception of you, you're going to be grounded in a sense of insecurity. You're going to be dragged down by anxiety. So I think this humble confidence allows me to approach things with growth in mind, and it allows me to be positive, but not overly positive. It allows me to think about possibilities.
So with this confidence, is this a skill that you learned? Like, how did you learn it? When did this happen for you?
I don't think confidence is a skill. I think confidence is knowing who you are. Learn who you are over time. I think there's something we should feel a little bit more free to do, which is trying different skins. My daughter, when she joined a new school, I think it was in 5th grade, she tried using her full name, Elena. So she introduced herself as Milena and decided, no, I like Lainey. Every time we join a new role or a company, we do that to some degree. We should feel free to do that. It's not being inauthentic to who we are. It's saying, here are the things that I want to shed. Here's a fresh start. It's an opportunity. How do I make the most of this opportunity? Who do I want to be? Who am I at my best self? And how do I create the environment and set the expectation for those around me and for myself that I can be that person more often than not, or as often as possible? So that means maybe I change ways of working. Maybe that means I manage my calendar differently. Maybe that means I adopt different language. Maybe I wear different clothes. Some of these things are more superficial than others, but they project a sense of self. And I think over time, as we try different things, we start finding that skin in which we're most comfortable. I think that's probably the biggest piece, right? That underlines humble confidence and who I am, which is pretty comfortable with myself. I don't think I present myself the way a lot of CEOs do. I don't think that I am very polished sometimes. I post stuff that you mentioned earlier on, Stacy, that is untouched, that is maybe the camera's a little jiggly, but I just have thoughts, and my desire is to share and help somebody else. And I think that desire comes across. And I've decided at some point, though I did question at multiple points, should I be more polished? People reach out all the time on LinkedIn and say, I can help you get whatever. I can help you. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I think I just want to be myself, because when you can see a role model or somebody in a leadership role and you relate to elements, suddenly you think, this is what representation is. Oh, well, maybe I can be myself and still be successful. Or beyond representation, you get to a point of normalization where it just happens I'm a woman. It just happens that I'm Chinese American. But what I stand for is more than what I look like or where I come from. What I stand for is knowing myself and all of my weaknesses and all of the unique attributes that make up who I am, and being comfortable enough to present that to the world as it is.
So speaking of giving back and being that role model, have you always been committed to sharing your ideas on LinkedIn? Is that something that happened for you in the more recent past, or how has that evolution been?
I have a date for that one. You've asked a lot about the evolution. I was like, oh, this one I have a date. I remember I was sitting in my office at Intercontinental Hotels Group, best office I've ever had in my life, just sitting overlooking the Bund in Shanghai. And I got to a point, I'd been a couple of years into the job. My team was over 5,000 people. I had a number of excellent leaders. And I found in that leadership role, I found myself saying similar things or repeating themes. And I remember thinking, I'm never going to have a chance to speak one-to-one to all 5,000 people. How do I get this out there more consistently? And so I started adopting little videos or little, handwritten notes that I would take a picture of and post in our company chat. And then I thought, well, maybe I can share it on LinkedIn more broadly. And I made this into like a gamified sense of self. I only allowed myself to use pen and marker that was available. And I made myself draw, and I am no great artist. And then I would post those things. And I remember it took off more than I thought. I remember one day I looked down and I had a couple thousand followers, and I'm like, who are these people? But I think there's so much selling, there's so much networking, and none of these things are bad. That is a lot of the purpose of LinkedIn, but I don't have any objective other than sharing something that might be helpful. Pretty soon I took away the gamification piece, and I was like, maybe I can polish it a little bit. And I started to just post more images, and then I started to post more videos. And that comes back up to your previous question, which is, how comfortable am I? Was I always that way? There were some videos that are probably a little more polished than others. There are some messages that I thought would resonate better and didn't. And there are some that I just kind of threw out there in a whim, and then people really, really gravitated to them. So it's also, I think actually putting yourself out there, honestly, is wonderful, because it keeps you humble all the time. The things that you think are different, but when you're able to collect so many inputs that react to what you're thinking at the moment, I think it has a way of sharpening and shaping you to your best self.
Yeah, and a different way of understanding yourself. So you understand yourself as a leader in this controlled environment with your team, and you have a specific role, and then you start putting yourself online, and it's a whole different thing. So now let's talk a little bit more about your book, The Spare Room. So how did this come about? Tell everybody what the book is about, all the things, and then we can kind of dive into that a little bit.
Sure. Thanks for asking. So the book is called The Spare Room, and it started off as a collection of stories because we've had, at this point, 17 kids who've lived in our spare bedroom over the last 20 years. They are not through a formal program. They're all everything from little babies to our oldest was 18 years old. They're just young people who come from places where they're vulnerable, they've been marginalized, and they just need a safe place. And we have had the opportunity time and again to offer that safe place. So I had a mix of messages I wanted to put out there. One was, we have more capacity in our lives than we can possibly imagine. And when we open our lives to that serving needs and to that sort of opportunity, we find that our lives become so much richer and we become so much more blessed for giving. My second message was, there's so much need in society. There are a lot of really large cracks in the social system wherever we've lived. And just driving awareness of some of those things. I think, people were surprised when they heard I had a child bride living with us. People were surprised at the consequences of the one-child policy in China. And so we had a chance to share a little bit more that helps everybody become a little smarter and well-informed about the world in which we live. And then what happened was 3, which is I found an agent and the agent found a publisher and they were interested in widening the aperture. So it became more of a call to action. So it's not really just our stories. It's lots of people's stories. And it was such a privilege and a fun experience to go interview all these people and create a collection of stories. And now the Spare Room stands for a call to action, which is how do you find the intersection of 2 things? And that's the model in the book, the offer and the offense. So the offer is that unique bundle of who you are, your experiences, your capabilities, your skills, your personality. And the offense is of all the things in the world, what calls to you so much that it stops you in your tracks and you think I have to do something about it. So I try to avoid using plastic as much as possible. We rescue a number of animals in our home. There are a lot of things that I want to do my part in the world. But when I see a little kid who has been hurt and doesn't have anywhere to go, that's the thing I need to do something about. And so if you can figure out your own offer and your own offense, the intersection of those 2 things, I call your social legacy. And the legacy is the impact that you leave, how you leave things better than you found them. And social defines the space in which you want to have that impact. I think so many people, and now younger and younger, they're asking these questions. For a lot of us, it was in our middle age or once we achieved a certain title or a pay grade, we thought, is this it? What else? But I think at multiple levels, at multiple places in our life, we start asking these questions of what else do I have to contribute? And it's not only contribution, it's a way of living. That's what the Spare Room is about.
Have there been any surprises since the book came out?
One was an incredibly exciting revelation, which is absolutely everybody has a spare room. I mean, I guess that makes sense, but as I started talking to people, I found so many people reaching out and saying, do you know, I grew up with my parents opening their home and they had, foster kids, or they had a neighbor's kid, or I met coworkers at VML where one woman had adopted 3 foster kids and one of them ended up burning down the house and a colleague invited them to live with them. I mean, you find incredible acts of outrageous generosity everywhere. And that has really been surprisingly motivating for me. I think with media being, how do you get clicks? You're polarizing, you're dramatic, you're extreme. And then the algorithms that underpin that content drive even more extreme points of view and opinions to which you are exposed. So you really have to be intentional about taking in multiple voices. Otherwise, you're going to follow down a path that gets more and more extreme and you don't even realize it's happening. So your view of the world becomes skewed. So I feel like as a result, there's a sense of responsibility. I think it's important that there are other voices, and I get to work in the creative space. And I live in Los Angeles. I'm surrounded by creative people who invest in their craft. And I'm like, wow, I never thought about this coming from a science background. Creativity is so important. These alternate voices that shape how we see the world and our role within it are so important.
Now I want to ask you a question that I love to ask women is, why do you feel motivated to have a voice at the table?
Well, my first answer is I think of my daughter. I want her to not hear from me, but see from me anything is possible. We all say this, but I think she has started to see it. One day, I went in her room I have this habit of picking up empty receptacles. It's like, I saw a TikTok the other day. It's like, go to my daughter's room is like going to an IKEA. I walk out with all these dishes. That is my experience. But I walked in and I saw this piece of paper and she had written an essay. And I can't remember what the prompt was, but basically she said, I overheard my mother in a conference call and I saw on the screen a video with all the little blocks of faces and she was the only woman. And I remember that she had observed this and reflected on her experience seeing that. So my first reaction is for my daughter and for everybody who has an aspiration. It may not be a title. I never had an aspiration for a certain title. I thought I was going to be a doctor. I thought I was going to be a pediatric oncologist. But very quickly, my aspiration became, what can I learn and how can I contribute more in the world? And that's why you can see it's reflected in the book's paradigm as well. Oh, this is a fun thing I've been thinking about a lot lately. How do we find each other's tribes and also our villages? And I think they're two different things. So your tribe are people who are like-minded, who share a life purpose, a philosophy. When you find your tribe, those are the people who have your back. They're the ones who laugh with you and cry with you, and they're the first ones you call because they get you. I've found my tribe over the years, and I feel so, so grateful for that. Equally, I've been thinking about this a lot because right now my spare room it's actually a detached unit and it has an adult couple living in it. He was one of my spare room kids 25 years ago. He's now married. And he and his wife are trying to make it in the creative arts. And so we wanted to find a home that had a detached unit where they could live rent-free and really pursue their craft. And so now I'm thinking about the spare room in a different way. It's sort of a shared living experience. And you know what? They're not people that I love them dearly. If I saw them in the street, I wouldn't think, I can't wait to get to know them. We look different. We live differently. We have different life philosophies. Life brought us together. So they are not my tribe. They're my village. And when you think about references to village, what do you think about? You think about the village idiot, the village drunk. The point is, the village are not people like yourself. The village is filled with amazing people who inspire you and people who you want nothing to do with. The village complements you. They're not like you. And that friction is so great because when you're around people who compliment you, who are different than you, who challenge you and annoy you, that's where you grow. So I think we need both. We need the tribe and we need the village.
So speaking of tribe, who comes to mind when you think about your career, that person who lifted you up, the person who showed you what was possible, the person who represented who you could become? Anybody come to mind?
So many names. I don't even know where to start. Early on at Procter & Gamble, the women who invested in me and believed in me, Vivian Bechtold was a marketing director who is now the godmother of my child, an incredible long-lasting relationship that I hope continues on forever. There are women who, Paris Watts-Stanfield was the woman who first interviewed me for Procter & Gamble for finance because I have my MBAs in finance. And she said, I actually think you should consider brand management. That pivot changed the entire trajectory of my life. And through the course of my career, I feel incredibly gifted to have worked for amazing people and to have had alongside mentors. Somebody more recently who comes to mind is Cheryl Bachelder, is an incredible female CEO, ex-Popeye CEO. She's on the board of a number of big companies. She was my mentor for over a year. And then this was something that I think we don't do often enough. We considered when the relationship tapers off. I think these things sort of like dribble to a stop, and that doesn't pay enough tribute or honor to such an incredible relationship. I think at one point we hit a year and I sent her a note and I said, I'd love to talk about how we continue to be friends. To be honest, I would love her to be my mentor forever. She is incredibly wise and I have learned so much from her. And yet I know that her time's limited and there are a lot of other people who probably want some time with her. So we agreed to touch base quarterly as friends. Cheryl's the name that comes to mind most recently.
Yeah. And, I appreciate you sharing that because I always want to remind people that there are so many people out there that you can connect with who genuinely want to help you with your career. And you on the other side are very accessible. It seems like it was like a quick yes. Like when I reached out to you to share your message, you were just like, sure. It's just so wonderful to see that humility, that humble confidence. And I really appreciate that and that ability to give back. And I also want to show other people to ask, to connect with a mentor, to, grow, because that's how we got here. We didn't get here by ourselves. And so the fact that you're just like immediately, so many, let me keep going.
Totally. I just did an event with Shelly Zalis, who's the founder and CEO of Female Quotient. And she's incredible. I've known her for years. And we were talking on stage, talking about how it's easy to forget. One woman who's incredible, who I worked for in Arkansas, Tia Jordan, she talked about how she entered the retail space back in the day where women had to wear the silk blouse with the bow tie. Interviews still happen in hotel rooms. It was not long ago when women had a very different existence in the workplace. And we have to remember we stand on their shoulders. And I was just thinking, what does the future look like when somebody stands on my shoulders? Have I made it that much easier, that much better for them?
Thank you for that. So speaking of that, as we wrap up today, any words of advice for a woman who is looking to advance her career into executive leadership? She's feeling a little bit stuck and can't decide what to do next.
I'd say stay open-minded. And again, don't force a paradigm. When I joined McCann World Group, again, a lot of people ask, oh, you went to the agency side. I had 3 final offers and they were all dramatically different. I had to really think through what matters to me because it's not region. They're all 3 in different countries. There was not industry. They're all 3 in different industries. It wasn't even boss, though that is so important to me, who you work for or your board, because they were all dramatically different. Ultimately, I developed my own little framework for the things that will drive me for the rest of my career. And I call it head, heart, and soul. So head, I want to remain curious and intellectually stimulated in the things of the future, whether that is wellness, technology. It's the things that will impact where the world goes and the world in which my daughter will live. Heart is, I love investing in people. And that's why it was such an easy yes when you reached out. Anything that allows me to invest in people, that allows me to die empty one day knowing I didn't hold anything back, I'm in. And then soul is, I wrote this book called The Spare Room, and I want to find a company whose ethos is congruent with my own life philosophy. So as long as I can find the head, heart, and soul that are fulfilling to me and where I can contribute, I'm always going to be incredibly content and thriving in my career. So my advice is find your version of that. May not be, because when headhunters call, what do they ask you? What region do you want to be in? What industry are you in? They immediately invest in a framework. And I understand why. That's their business. And it doesn't mean you can't answer those questions, but you should have your own in mind, which is open-mindedly, what matters the most to me? Is it money? If it is, be unabashed and say so. Is it title? Be unabashed and say so, because you want to put yourself in a place where you are going to be joyful and excited every day that you wake up. So that might pull you out of a lack of clarity in terms of which job should I go for? Should I stay in this company and push for the next level or go look outside? Well, what gives you joy? Where do you thrive? What are the contextual elements that feed into that environment? Define that, and that'll help clarify everything else.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you so much, Emily. How can people connect with you online? Of course, we'll link to your book in the show notes.
So I have a website. It's social-legacy.com, and I blog there, and I have an email there. You can find me for the other stuff that Stacy first found on LinkedIn. It's Emily Chang 8621. I also have some socials for the book. So on Facebook and Instagram, you can find me at thespareroom.emilychang.
Great. Thank you, Emily. I am so appreciative. Thank you so much for your time today. Before you go, I have a question for you. Do you know how close you are to your next promotion? Really? Not what your boss has told you, not what you even believe to be true, but have you actually taken the time to sit down, take an assessment, review the 5 categories that it takes to get promoted into senior executive leadership positions and decided where you fall in each category and given yourself a ranking on a scale of 1 to 10 of how close you are to getting your next promotion? Have you done this? Well, now's your chance. If that feels interesting to you and you're like, hey, I want to know exactly how close I might actually be or how far away you might be and what it's going to take to get you even closer, then I invite you to take my promotability quiz. This is a quiz that I put together with practical tips that actually tell you where you're lacking and where you're winning. What are the areas that you actually need to improve and not necessarily what your boss is telling you all the time, so that you can take concrete steps towards landing that next promotion and changing the face of the leadership table. Go to yourpromotabilityscore.com to take your free assessment today. Yourpromotabilityscore.com, and let me know how it goes.